I still remember the exact moment my daughter-in-law, Sana, leaned closer to my son and whispered something I could not fully hear. But I heard enough to understand the meaning. She said I was getting too close. Too close to my own son. Too close to the boy I had raised with my own hands, through every fever, every exam, every heartbreak. Too close to the child who once held my finger to walk, who once cried if I stepped outside the room for even a minute. Too close to the boy who used to call me his whole world. Those words, and the silence that followed, told me something had changed forever. My son did not look at me with the same warmth that once filled his eyes. He did not defend me or even question her. He simply lowered his gaze, like a tired man who had already made up his mind. And in that quiet room, with soft evening light touching the curtains, I felt something inside me slowly break. I did not cry. I did not speak. I simply stood there, like a guest in a home I had helped build. A home I once believed was mine too. And in that moment, I realized the truth I had been avoiding. My son had moved on from me, and he did it without even hearing my voice. I still remember the way Sana looked at me that morning. It was a soft smile, polite, almost careful, like someone trying to hide a thought behind her eyes. I didn't think much of it at first because she had always been respectful, always quiet, always someone who chose silence instead of confrontation. But there was something different that day, something I felt in the air before I heard any words. It was the kind of heaviness that sits on your chest without touching you. I tried to ignore it. I tried to believe that everything was still the same, that Saad still needed me the way he always had, that my voice still mattered in his life. But sometimes a change enters a home silently. It doesn't knock. It doesn't warn. It simply settles between relationships like a thin sheet of glass. And you only notice it when you try to speak and your words no longer reach the person standing right in front of you. That day, when Sana told my son that I was becoming too close, the words did not come to me directly. I heard them only because Saad lowered his voice in the next room, and my heart somehow learned to hear even the quietest things when it came to him. I didn't move closer. I just stood where I was, my hands resting on the kitchen counter, my breath faint and small. I didn't want to listen, but my heart forced me. Every mother knows that feeling, when you hear something that was never meant for you, and yet it changes everything inside you. Saad didn't defend me. He didn't smile and say, "Mom is just being loving." He didn't hold Sana's hand and say, "There is no such thing as being too close to the person who raised me." Instead, he stayed silent. And silence can be louder than any hurtful word. I remember staring at the kettle on the stove, watching the steam rise in a thin, trembling line. It felt like my thoughts were rising the same way, unsteady, searching for a place to disappear. I tried to breathe slowly. I told myself it was a misunderstanding. I told myself Sana must have been tired, overwhelmed, maybe feeling insecure in her new home. I told myself that Saad's silence meant nothing. But deep inside I felt something shift. Something small, like a thread that snaps without sound, but you know it was holding a part of your heart together. When Saad finally walked into the kitchen, his eyes didn't meet mine the way they used to. There was no boyish smile, no playful greeting, none of the warmth that used to fill the room just because he entered it. Instead, there was a distance, quiet, polite, almost cold. He asked me if I was okay, but his voice already belonged somewhere else. Did not reach me. It floated between us like a stranger's voice, not a son's. And in that moment, I realized something I had never imagined. A person does not leave you only when they walk away. Sometimes they leave you while still standing beside you. I wanted to speak. I wanted to ask him what I had done to make him pull away. I wanted to tell him that love does not have borders, that a mother's closeness is not a burden but a blessing. But the words stayed in my throat. They felt heavy, afraid, unsure. I simply nodded and forced a smile, hoping he would hear something in the silence, anything that might remind him of who we used to be. But silence is a language many people never learn to understand. So I stood there, alone in the kitchen, listening to the soft echo of footsteps walking away from me. I didn't know then that this was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would pull me into a storm I never prepared for. But every story has a moment like this, a quiet beginning before the heart breaks. And mine began the day my daughter-in-law told my son I was becoming too close, and he believed her without ever hearing my voice. I remember the moment so clearly because it felt like the room around me went quiet, even though nothing had actually changed. Sana stood there, her voice calm but firm, saying words I never expected to hear. She told Saad that I was getting too close, as if a mother's love had suddenly become something dangerous. I looked at my son, waiting for him to laugh it off, or at least look at me for reassurance. But he didn't. He kept his eyes down, as if he was trying to avoid something heavy inside him. I felt my heart press against my chest, slow and painful, like each beat was trying to ask a question I wasn't ready to hear. I tried to smile, hoping it would soften the tension in the air, but even my smile felt out of place. Sana crossed her arms gently, not harshly, not loudly, but with a confidence that made me feel small in my own home. Saad's silence spoke louder than any argument ever could. It told me that something had changed, quietly, slowly, and without my noticing. I wanted to reach out to him, to touch his arm, to remind him that I was the same mother who held him when he cried as a boy. But my hand stayed still, resting on the edge of the sofa like it was afraid to move. I felt tears forming in the corners of my eyes, but I knew I would not let them fall. There was a strange kind of dignity in holding yourself together, even when you feel the ground shifting beneath your feet. In that moment, I understood that love doesn't always leave loudly. Sometimes it slips away in silence. I still remember the early days after Sana married my son Saad. Our home felt different, but in a gentle and hopeful way. I would watch the two of them laugh softly in the living room, their hands brushing against each other, their eyes full of new dreams. I felt proud, the kind of pride a mother feels when she watches her child step into a new chapter of life. At that time, I believed marriage would bring us closer, that together we would build a peaceful and loving home. I tried my best to give them space, to make sure Sana felt welcome, not overwhelmed. I would often remind myself that she was young, stepping into a family she barely knew, trying to prove she belonged. Sometimes I caught her watching me quietly, as if she was unsure whether I approved of her or judged her. I smiled every time, hoping it would ease her heart, but sometimes my smile seemed to confuse her more. Saad always tried to bridge the gap, speaking to me gently and then turning to Sana with the same soft tone, as if he was tying threads between us with his words. I appreciated his efforts, even when they felt small, because I believed small steps were better than none. But slowly, I noticed Sana pulling away, little by little, like a flower folding itself when the evening grows colder. She didn't speak much, and when she did, her words were polite but distant, like she was trying hard to keep a careful line between us. I told myself it would change with time, but time sometimes works differently for people who are learning to share the same home. I didn't know then that the smallest misunderstandings can grow quietly in the spaces where words should have been. And I didn't know that one day, the silence between us would become the very thing that separated me from my son. The days after that small moment with Sana stayed quietly in my mind, like a soft echo that refuses to fade. I kept telling myself that maybe I misunderstood her tone, that perhaps she was simply tired or distracted by the responsibilities of the home. Sometimes a daughter-in-law does not always know how to express herself gently, and sometimes a mother reads too much into a passing glance or a careless word. But something inside me, something old and quiet like a mother's instinct, kept tugging at my heart, reminding me that something deeper was happening. I tried not to dwell on it, because I wanted peace more than anything else. I wanted Saad to have a calm home, a life without tension or pressure because of me. I reminded myself that every woman needs her space in her own home, especially in the early years of marriage. Still, there were moments when I saw Saad turning to Sana first before answering me, as if he needed her permission to even speak. It made me pause, but I tried not to show it. I would smile, adjust my shawl, and pretend everything was perfectly fine. Maybe all mothers go through such transitions, I thought. Maybe this is simply a phase of letting go. But the small cracks in our relationship, the ones I kept ignoring, slowly began to widen. Another memory from those days stays with me, like a photograph frozen in the heart. It was a warm afternoon, sunlight falling gently through the living room windows, turning everything soft and golden. I had cooked Saad's favorite dish because he had mentioned the night before that he missed my cooking. I remember standing in the kitchen, stirring the pot slowly, feeling a warm happiness as the familiar smell filled the home. When Saad came back from work, he walked in with Sana by his side, both of them talking quietly and smiling. I waited for him to notice the food, to smile back at me the way he always did, with that spark of childhood still shining in his eyes. But instead, he looked at Sana first, as if waiting for her reaction before forming his own. She glanced at the table, then at me, and gave a small polite smile that did not reach her eyes. "We already ate outside," she said softly, without much emotion. Saad nodded quickly, almost too quickly, and added, "Yes, Amma. Sorry, we didn't know you were making anything special." My heart dropped a little, but I hid it behind a gentle nod. Mothers learn early how to swallow hurt quietly. I told them it was fine, that the food could be saved for later. But after they went upstairs, silence filled the house again, a silence that felt heavier than before. I sat at the dining table with the untouched food, reminding myself that love means patience, and patience means silence. The more days passed, the more I noticed this soft distancing. Small shifts, small hesitations, small spaces where my son no longer reached for my voice first. I kept telling myself that it was normal for a newly married couple to be close, to lean on each other for decisions. But sometimes late at night, when the house was quiet and all the lights were turned off, I would sit in my room and ask myself when exactly Saad had taken that first step away from me. Maybe it was not a single moment. Maybe it was a series of gentle steps, each one too small to notice until the distance became large enough to feel. And yet I still held on to hope. I believed that deep within my son's heart, there was still that space where my voice mattered, where my presence brought comfort. I believed that the bond between mother and child does not fade so easily. But I did not know then that life was slowly preparing me for a truth I was not ready to face. I remember the early days after Saad married Sana. Those first few months felt like a quiet dream, the kind that makes you smile even when nothing special is happening. Watching them walk into the house together, side by side, used to bring me comfort. It felt like my son was finally stepping into the life he had worked so hard for. I was proud of him. I was hopeful for both of them. And I believed, with all my heart, that our home would remain a place filled with respect, warmth, and gentle love. Sana was polite in the beginning, that soft-spoken, careful with her words. She would ask me if I needed help in the kitchen. She would sit beside me during tea time. She even laughed at small stories about Saad from his childhood. I used to think, maybe God has blessed my son with a partner who will hold this home with the same tenderness I did. And because I believed this, I opened my heart to her. I tried to treat Sana not like a guest, but like my own daughter. I knew marriage was not easy. I knew she was adjusting to a new home, a new routine, a new life. And I wanted her to feel safe. I wanted her to feel supported. That is what a mother does. She prepares her heart to hold one more person. But with time, small changes began to shape the air inside our house. It started with silence, a quiet that slipped between us like a thin sheet of glass, not loud enough to be noticed at first, but sharp enough to separate us without making a sound. She would walk past me sometimes without greeting me. Or she would reply with one-word answers, even when I tried to start a long, warm conversation. Still, I told myself she was adjusting. Still, I smiled and continued giving her space. I didn't want Saad to worry. I didn't want Sana to think I was watching her closely. Oh, I kept my heart calm and steady, telling myself that families take time to settle. And I waited. One evening, I heard Saad enter the house. His footsteps had a rhythm I could recognize even half asleep. I went to the living room because I always liked to greet him first. It was a habit since he was little. A mother's instinct. Meet your child at the door, ask about his day, offer him tea, make him feel seen. But that evening, when I stepped forward with a smile, something inside me hesitated. Sana reached him first. She wrapped her arm around his. She looked up at him with a smile I had not seen all day. And he smiled back at her. In a way, he once smiled at me when he came home after school, proud of something he had done. I stood there silently. Not jealous, not upset. Just slowly realizing that a shift was happening. So gentle, so natural, yet so undeniable. A shift I had not prepared for. Saad looked at me and said, "Mom, I'm a little tired today. I'll talk to you later." His voice was not harsh. It was not disrespectful. It was simply distant. Like there was a door between us that I had never noticed before. I nodded and stepped back. Just a few steps. But those steps echoed inside me much louder than the wooden floor beneath my feet. That night, when I lay in bed, I placed my hand on my chest and whispered to myself, "He's building his own life now. Let him breathe." I meant those words when I said them, that I wanted to embrace them fully. But somewhere deep inside, something felt different. Not broken. Not lost. Just different. Like a room you once lived in that suddenly doesn't smell like you anymore. Saad and Sanaa were growing into their new world. And I, quietly, softly, slowly, was learning how to let them. But even then, I had no idea how deeply Sanaa's words would change everything. How silently they would enter my son's mind. How powerfully they would distance him from the woman who raised him. And how one day, a single sentence would shatter the bond one thought nothing could break. I remember the first small moment when something inside me shifted, though no one else noticed it. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. The sky outside was pale, soft, and gray, the kind of light that usually comforts me. But that morning it felt heavier. I was in the kitchen early as always, preparing breakfast for Saad and Sanaa. I moved slowly, carefully, as if every sound might disturb a delicate balance in the house. The kettle hissed softly, and the smell of tea filled the air, a smell that had always meant peace for me. But as I set the cups on the table, I heard whispers from the hallway. They were soft, quick, almost rushed. I could not make out every word, but I heard my name. And I heard Sanaa's voice, low and tense. "She is getting too involved. Saad, you need to set boundaries." I froze, not because of fear but because of confusion. The words did not match the things I thought she felt about me. I waited a moment before stepping out, trying to gather my breath, trying to pretend I had not heard anything. When I entered the dining room, they both went quiet. Sanaa immediately smiled politely, too politely, and Saad looked at the floor. My heart wanted to ask, "Is something wrong?" But my mouth remained still. I simply placed the breakfast before them and whispered, "Eat while it's warm." That was the first small distance. A tiny step backward that no one else sensed. During the next few days, more little things changed. Sanaa no longer asked me to join her when she cooked. She used to say, "Auntie, come sit with me, I enjoy talking to you." But now she cooked alone, moving quickly, shutting drawers harder than before. When I tried to help, she would say, No, it's okay. Please rest." Her tone was polite, but it carried a hidden edge, like a thin line of ice under warm water. Saad, who always asked me how my day was, now seemed distracted. He came home tired, went straight to his room, and usually closed the door behind him. Of course, every son grows busy, every man carries responsibilities, but this felt different. It felt like he was avoiding a space where I existed too strongly. I did not blame him. I wanted to believe it was work, stress, exhaustion. I repeated those thoughts to myself like small prayers. But the silence in the house felt new, unfamiliar, as if I had become a guest instead of a mother. One evening I was folding laundry when I heard Saad and Sanaa talking again. Their voices were not raised, but there was a firmness in Sanaa's words. "She is always around, Saad. You do not see it, but it affects us. I feel like I cannot breathe sometimes." I stopped folding. The cloth fell from my hands and slid onto the floor. Saad replied quietly, "She is my mother, Sanaa. She means no harm." "I know," Sanaa said. "But she is becoming too close. You need to create space. She must understand that we are a couple now." The sentence struck me like a gentle but sharp wind. Too close. I looked around my small room, my quiet corner, my folded clothes, my old shawl on the chair. I wondered how my presence, my love, could ever feel like too much. But I also knew that love can become heavy when hearts do not lift together. In the following days, I tried to give them more space. I stayed in my room longer. I walked slower. I spoke less. I thought that if I stepped back, everything would adjust again. But stepping back made me feel as if I were disappearing. And maybe that was what Sana wanted. Still I tried. I tried because Saad deserved peace in his home. I tried because Sana was now his life partner. I tried because mothers learn to shrink their worlds if it keeps their children happy. But no matter how softly I moved, every step seemed to echo. Every word I said felt like it carried weight. Every smile from Sana felt thinner than before. The real conflict began slowly. Soft, small storms that built inside the walls. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shouting. It was the quiet ache of being misunderstood, the silent fear of losing my place, the gentle breaking that comes when love becomes a shadow instead of light. And in those quiet days, I began to realize something painful. Sana wasn't the only one pulling away. Saad was too. The days that followed were quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that settles in a home when something unspoken is hanging in the air. I could sense it when I walked into Saad and Sana's living room. I could sense it in the way Sana avoided my eyes. And in the way Saad sat a little too still whenever I was around. It was as if my presence had become something they needed to tiptoe around. Even though I still tried to carry myself with softness, I told myself over and over, maybe it will settle. Maybe it's just a phase. But a small voice inside me whispered, something has changed. One afternoon, I arrived with a small bowl of kheer I had made. It was Saad's favorite dessert ever since he was a little boy. He used to say, "Mom, no one makes it like you." I still remembered the way his face lit up whenever I brought it to him. But that day when I placed the bowl on the table, he barely smiled. He was polite, yes, but distant. And distance from a child who once held your hand at every step does not feel polite. It feels like a quiet heartbreak. Sana entered the room a moment later, her steps soft and her expression unreadable. She looked at the kheer, then looked at me, then at Saad. There was a flicker, something small, something sharp in her eyes. She didn't say anything. But silence can speak louder than words. I tried to break that silence gently. I said, "Sana, daughter, I made this for you both. I hope you like it." She pressed a faint smile on her lips. "Thank you. But we were actually planning to go out later," she replied. Her tone wasn't rude. But it had distance in it, like she was placing a small wall between us. I felt something shift in my chest, something that felt like loss. Saad didn't defend me. He didn't remind her that it was his favorite. He didn't even take a bite. He just nodded and said, "Yes, Mom, maybe later." Maybe later. Two words that carried a weight I didn't want to face. I left the bowl there on the table. But it felt like I had placed a piece of my heart there too. When I stood up, the room felt smaller, tighter, as if love needed more space than what existed between the three of us now. As I walked toward the door, I heard them whispering behind me. Their voices were low, but low does not mean unheard. I caught fragments. Too attached. Always here. Giving him space. Space, that a word that had never been needed between me and my son before Sana entered his life. Not because she was bad. No, I didn't allow my heart to think that. But because Saad was changing slowly, quietly, and I didn't know how to hold on without hurting anyone. That evening as I walked home, the city lights blurred in my eyes. It wasn't raining. But it felt like the world understood my sadness. Every step felt heavier than the last. I kept telling myself, it's just adjustment. All relationships take time. But deep down, I knew this was more than adjustment. This was the beginning of something breaking. The next week, another small crack appeared. Saad stopped calling as often, where he once called me every night just to ask if I had eaten. He now called once every few days. And the calls were shorter, a little rushed, a little distracted, as if his mind was somewhere else, someone else, even while talking to me. One night when he called, I heard Sana speaking in the background. Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried a tone that made Saad end the call quickly. He said, "Mom, I'll talk to you later, okay? Sana needs something." And before I could even respond, the line went silent. I stared at the phone for a long time. Not because I was angry. Never. But because my son, my heartbeat, had once paused everything for me. And now he couldn't pause even a single moment. These little things started adding up. Whenever I visited, Sana would sit closer to Saad, sometimes placing her hand on his arm, almost protectively. She didn't have to say the words. The message was clear enough. I was a guest now. Not a mother, not a part of the home. Just someone passing through. And Saad. He didn't notice that, or maybe he did, but he didn't want to see it. Love can make people blind, even a child's love for his mother. One afternoon, something small but painful happened. Something that stays with a mother forever. I reached for Saad's hand while talking to him, a simple gesture, a gesture I had done 1,000 times since he was born. But this time, he gently pulled his hand away. It wasn't harsh, it wasn't rude, but it was enough to make my heart catch in my chest. He didn't look at me when he did it, he just continued talking as if nothing had happened. But things like that do not go unnoticed. Not by a mother, never by a mother. I told myself not to cry. Not there. Not in front of them, so I smiled, nodded, and continued the conversation as if something inside me had not quietly crumbled. When I finally returned home, I closed the door behind me and let the silence settle around me. Silence can be comforting sometimes, but that night it wasn't. It was heavy. It was accusing. It said, "You're losing him." But I wasn't ready to admit that. Not yet. Not until the day Sana said something that would change everything. Something that would open a wound I didn't know I was still carrying. And Saad, he believed her. I remember one afternoon when Sana stood in the kitchen, her hands resting on the counter, her face unusually quiet. I had just finished cooking Saad's favorite lentil soup, the way he liked it since childhood, with a little extra garlic and a slow simmer. I carried the bowl toward the dining table, feeling a small warmth in my chest, thinking maybe today he would sit and eat with me as he did when he was little. But as I placed the bowl on the mat, Sana walked up to me and gently pushed it a little to the side. She smiled, but her eyes did not. She said in a soft voice, "Auntie, Saad prefers to eat with me upstairs now. He says it helps him relax." Her words were gentle, but something inside me sank slowly, like a stone dropping into deep water. I nodded as if it did not matter, though it did. It mattered more than I wanted to admit. I stepped back, letting the steam from the bowl rise into the quiet air between us. Sana picked up a tray and prepared to take the food upstairs. She moved with a kind of ownership that made me feel like a guest in my own home. I whispered to myself, "It's all right, this happens." But even in that whisper, I heard the tremble of a mother trying to stay composed. I watched her walk up the stairs, carrying the tray meant for my son, and I felt a small thread inside me loosen. The conflicts in our house were never loud. They were quiet, almost whisper-like, and that made them hurt more. Saad had always been gentle, the kind of boy who placed his hand on my shoulder when I looked tired, the kind who said, "Mom, I'm here," without me having to ask. But after marriage, those moments became rare, like the final days of winter sunlight, still present but fading. I noticed he spoke less to me, even though he was home. He often looked distracted, as if listening to someone else's voice inside his head, not mine. When I asked him small questions, he answered politely but quickly, like he was afraid someone would misunderstand. Sana never said anything rude directly, yet her presence shaped the space around him. Sometimes when I entered the room, she would lower her voice, and Saad would fall silent. I told myself it was normal for young couples to have their own privacy. But privacy slowly turned into distance. And distance slowly turned into something that felt like a locked door I did not have the key for. At night, when the house settled into silence, I would sit in the living room and wonder how a mother loses her place without any noise, without any argument, without any warning. One evening, Saad came home late, looking tired, his shoulders heavy. I walked toward him with a cup of tea, the way I always had. He smiled, but it stayed only for a second before fading into a thoughtful expression. Sana came downstairs, placed her hand gently on his arm and asked, "Saad, should we go talk upstairs? You had a long day." He nodded almost automatically and turned away from me. I stood there holding the cup, feeling its heat warming only my hands, not my heart. I quietly said, "Son, at least take a sip before you go." He paused, looked back, and then looked at Sana, as if waiting for her approval. She gave a small shrug and he said, "Mom, I'll drink it later." They walked upstairs together, their steps soft but heavy in my ears. I placed the cup on the table and sat down. The steam from the tea curled into the air and disappeared, just like the conversations we used to have. I stared at the cup until it grew cold. And in that coldness, I felt something shift inside me again. Days passed, and Sana began to say subtle things that made me question myself. She would say things like, "Maybe Saad feels pressured when you talk too much about the past," or "He's becoming independent, you should give him space." Her tone was kind, almost caring, but every sentence felt like a gentle push away from my son. I began speaking less, moving softer, taking up less room in the house as if I feared disturbing the new rhythm of their marriage. Saad seemed unaware of the small walls forming between us, or maybe he trusted Sana too much to notice. Whenever I tried to sit with them, Sana would place her hand on his knee or whisper something to him, and he would smile only at her, not at me. I tried to convince myself that this was normal, that this is how sons grow after marriage. But deep down I knew something was shifting, something I could not touch or fix with love. I could feel myself fading from his daily life, slowly, quietly, painfully. One afternoon, I heard their voices behind the closed door of their room. Sana's voice was firm though not loud. She said, "Saad, you need to set boundaries. Your mother wants too much attention. It's affecting us." Her words hit me like cold rain. I froze in the hallway, my hand resting lightly on the wall. Saad replied in a tired voice, "Sana, she doesn't want attention. She just talks. That's how she is." Sana sighed, sounding disappointed. "You always defend her. But you never think about how it makes me feel." I stepped back before I could hear more. I did not want to hear my son forced to choose between peace and me. That night I prayed silently, not for myself but for understanding. I prayed my son would not see me as a burden. But a small part of me feared that maybe Sana's words were slowly becoming his truth. On a quiet evening, the kind of evening where the sky feels heavy even without rain, I remember standing near the kitchen window, watching the streetlights turn on one by one, feeling a strange weight inside my chest. Saad had not come home yet, and Sana had been silent for most of the day. The house felt different, colder, as if something unseen had entered it. I kept my hands busy, folding napkins, wiping the counter, boiling water for tea I did not even want. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words, and that night it was shouting at me. A small ache grew inside me because I had felt a shift in my home over the past weeks, but now it felt stronger. I sensed something was coming, something I was not prepared for. I tried to calm myself, telling my heart to be patient, to trust, to hold on. But my thoughts kept circling back to the same worry, that Sana had been distant, too distant. When she walked through the hallway now, she avoided my eyes. When I tried to speak with her, she smiled politely, but her eyes were guarded. I knew she was struggling with something, yet she did not tell me. I wished she had come to me, sat beside me, and shared what was hurting her. But she kept her distance, and I kept hoping it would pass. That night, though, the distance felt final, as if something had already been decided without me. I kept glancing at the clock, waiting for Saad, waiting for the sound of his voice. When he finally entered the house, the door opened softly, but the silence afterward felt like a storm waiting to break. I walked toward him with a small smile, relieved to see him safe, relieved to hear his footsteps. "You came late today," I said gently, hoping to start a simple conversation. He nodded but did not look at me, and that small gesture cut deeper than I expected. His shoulders were tense, his eyes tired, and I felt a rush of fear that this was not just a long day at work. "Is everything okay?" I asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. He took a deep breath, a slow, heavy one, and for a moment he looked like a child again, lost, confused, hurt. But then he said, "We need to talk," and I felt something inside me sink. Those 4 words carry so much weight in a home. They change the air. They change the heart. He walked to the living room, and I followed him slowly, my hands shaking even though I tried to steady them. Sana was already sitting on the sofa, her eyes lowered, her fingers twisting the end of her dupatta nervously. My heart softened when I saw her like that because she looked scared, not angry. I wished she would look at me, but she didn't. I sat down quietly, waiting for Saad to speak, praying silently that whatever was coming would pass gently over all of us. Saad cleared his throat, and his voice came out lower than usual, as if the words were painful for him too. Mom. Sana wants to say something. The moment he said her name, something inside me tightened. My eyes moved to her, and I waited, giving her all the space she needed. Sana took her time before raising her face, and her eyes looked tired, almost defeated. Mom. I feel uncomfortable, she said, her voice trembling softly. I stared at her, confused, unsure where this was going. I feel like... You are getting too close to Saad, she whispered, as if saying the words made her feel guilty. For a moment I did not understand. My mind could not make sense of the words. Too close. To my own son. I blinked, stunned, unable to speak. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as if everything around me froze in place. Sana continued, tears forming in her eyes. I feel like he listens to you more. Feel left out. I feel like I don't belong. My heart softened instantly because her words came from pain, not anger. But the accusation still stung, like touching a wound I didn't know existed. I turned to Saad, hoping he would clear the misunderstanding instantly. He should have said, "No, Sana, it's not like that." He should have said, "She is my mother and you are my wife, there is space for both." He should have taken my hand or spoken with love. But he didn't. Instead, Saad sat there silently, his eyes fixed on the floor, his hands clasped tightly together. That silence felt like a betrayal. Not a loud betrayal, not a cruel one, but a quiet, painful one, the kind that stays with you long after the moment ends. Saad, I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. Do you believe this? He closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded very slightly. That nod changed everything inside my heart. It felt like someone had gently closed a door that had always been open. Not slammed it, just closed it with finality. I realized then that Sana had spoken for both of them. That whatever fear or insecurity she felt, Saad had allowed it to become truth. He believed her. He believed that I, his mother who raised him with her whole heart, was somehow standing between them. A cold wave of sadness washed over me, but I kept my face calm. I did not want to hurt Sana. I did not want Saad to feel torn. I simply sat there, feeling the silence grow roots around my feet. Mom, Saad finally said, his voice breaking a little. I just want things to be peaceful. I want Sana to feel safe. I nodded slowly, understanding what he was trying to say, even though his words pierced my heart. I never wanted to make her feel unsafe, I replied softly. I never wanted to hurt anyone. My voice sounded delicate, like it might disappear if I spoke too loudly. Sana wiped her eyes but still avoided my gaze. I know, Mom, she whispered. I know you never meant to hurt me. I feel like I need space. Space. That word echoed in my mind. Space from me. I folded my hands together in my lap, grounding myself. I did not want to break. I did not want to cry. I wanted to respond with love, even though my heart felt like it was slowly tearing. If space is what you need, I said gently, then I will give it. The room felt colder after I said those words, but I stayed steady. I stayed calm. Because love sometimes means stepping back, even when it hurts. But then the moment that broke me came, quietly, almost unnoticed. I tried to speak to Saad again, gently, softly. Son, I whispered. But he didn't look up. He didn't turn his head. He didn't respond. For the first time in my life, my son did not hear my voice, even though I was sitting only a few feet away from him. That was the moment everything changed for me. That was the moment I realized he had already moved on in his heart, following someone else's fear, someone else's pain, someone else's voice. Mine no longer reached him. Mine no longer mattered. And that silent moment, that quiet ignoring of my voice, became the deepest turning point of my life. It was the moment I lost something I had never imagined losing. I remember standing there in the quiet of the living room, feeling as if the house itself was holding its breath with me. The evening light was dim, casting long shadows across the floor, and for a moment I wished those shadows could hide me, hide the pain I knew was about to unfold. My hands trembled slightly as I wiped them on my shawl, trying to look composed, even though a storm was forming inside me. I had heard enough whispers, enough small comments, enough half-truths to know that something was wrong, but I was not prepared for how deeply it would cut. I kept telling myself, maybe it is nothing. Maybe Sana is only stressed, maybe Saad is tired. But the heart always knows. It knows long before the mind allows the truth to surface. That evening, the truth was waiting for me behind a half-closed door. I could hear their voices from the hallway, low, tense, careful in a way that made me feel like an outsider in my own home. Saad's voice was tired, almost pleading. Sana's voice was firm, steady, as if she had rehearsed every word before saying it out loud. I paused, my breath trapped in my throat, my fingertips resting on the wall to steady myself. I did not want to listen. I did not want to be the kind of mother who presses her ear to doors and searches for meaning in broken words. But the words came to me anyway, slipping through the crack in the door like cold air. And once heard, they could not be unheard. She is getting too close, Saad, Sana was saying softly, but with conviction. It is not healthy anymore. She watches everything. She questions everything. It feels like she is trying to take over our home. Take over you. I felt the ground shift beneath me, felt the steadiness leave my legs. Her words were not loud, but they were sharp, shaped by insecurity, fear, maybe even jealousy. But they cut through me all the same. I closed my eyes and leaned against the wall, listening to the beating of my own heart, which suddenly felt too heavy for my chest. 1,000 memories rushed back, holding Saad as a baby, guiding his first steps, celebrating his small victories, praying for him through every storm in his life. And now I was being spoken about as if I were a problem, as if my love had become a burden, as if closeness itself had turned into a crime. Saad hesitated before he replied. His silence hurt more than any words could. It was long, stretching, uncomfortable. It was the silence of someone who was choosing his next words carefully, because he already knew what he was going to say. And when he finally spoke, my world shifted again. Sana, maybe you're right, he said quietly. Those 4 words hit me like a cold wind. Maybe you're right. Words that told me he had believed her. Words that told me my place in his life was changing, slipping, fading. Words that felt like a slow door closing. I pressed a hand to my mouth to stop the sound that rose inside my chest. Not a cry, but something deeper. A sadness that swallowed me whole in that single moment. I wanted to walk away. I wanted to gather myself before they noticed I was standing there. But my feet would not move, no matter how much I tried to will them forward. They felt rooted to the ground by years of love and memories I was suddenly unsure belonged here anymore. Then Sana spoke again, this time with a gentleness so controlled it felt rehearsed. I am not saying she is bad, Saad. I just want our home to feel like ours. I want space for us. I want you to be with me. Not always with her. You are a husband before you are a son. I felt the weight of those words as if they had been placed directly on my chest. A husband before a son. A new loyalty replacing an old one. A shift I had always known would come, but not like this, not with such quiet cruelty. I had always wanted Saad to be a good husband, a devoted partner, a man who loved his family. But I had never thought I would have to lose him in the process. I had never imagined his love for me would be seen as something threatening. Something that needed to be reduced. Saad exhaled deeply. I could picture him rubbing his forehead the way he always did when he was stressed. I don't want to hurt her, he said. She raised me alone. She needs me. Sana replied softly, She doesn't need you. She just doesn't know how to let go. Her words were final, decisive, and I felt them settle heavily inside my chest. I wanted to shout that I had let go years ago when he started his own life. I wanted to say I had celebrated his new home, his new responsibilities, his new love. I wanted to explain that everything I did, every question I asked, every gesture I made was out of habit, out of affection, not out of need. But they could not hear me, not through the door, not in their hearts. They had already drawn their conclusions. I do not know how long I stood there before Saad opened the door. But when he did, my heart stopped for a moment. His eyes met mine, and I saw flickers of guilt, surprise, confusion, perhaps even shame. Sana stood behind him, her expression controlled, unreadable. For a long second none of us spoke. The air between us felt heavy, thick with truth that could not be ignored anymore. I found my voice first, though it trembled. Do you really think I am too close, Saad? Too present? He swallowed, unable to meet my gaze. Mom, things are different now. Different. Such a small word. Such a final one. Sana stepped forward, her tone polite but distant. We just need space. I hope you understand. Understand. Another word that carried weight, asking me to accept something I had never imagined. I nodded slowly, though my heart was breaking inside my chest. Of course, I whispered. I understand more than you think. And in that moment I did. It was the turning point. The moment I realized my son, my only child, was moving into a new chapter of life where my voice no longer guided him. A chapter where my presence was now something to manage, not cherish. A chapter where I was learning painfully where I now stood. A mother on the outside of her own story. I remember standing by the kitchen window the next morning, watching the sunlight slowly touch the garden, and all I felt inside me was a quiet kind of ache. It was not the sharp pain of yesterday's words, but a soft, dull heaviness that filled my chest like a slow-moving tide. I kept thinking about Sana's voice, calm yet firm, telling Saad that I was becoming too close, as if a mother's warmth could ever become something dangerous. I remembered Saad's silence when she spoke, the way he did not defend me, the way he simply nodded, and that memory stayed with me like a shadow that refused to fade. When he walked past me in the hallway later that day, his steps quick, his eyes avoiding mine, it felt as though something inside me finally fell apart. I wanted to call his name, but the words did not rise. I wanted to reach out, but my hands stayed still. All I could do was watch him leave the house again, carrying the weight of someone else's words above his own mother's voice. That day I understood a truth I had never imagined I would face. A mother's presence can be replaced, even if her love never can. And the hardest part was not his distance, but how quietly it happened. Felt like losing him without any goodbyes. And I stood there, holding the silence he had left behind, and the days that followed. I tried to fill my time with small tasks, but every little thing in the house reminded me of moments that used to be filled with life. The clinking of cups reminded me of mornings when Saad and I drank tea together, sitting side by side, talking about nothing and everything. The empty hallway reminded me of the days he would rush out calling, "Mom, I'll be back soon," with a smile that always warmed me. Even the quiet evenings felt different now, not peaceful, but empty in a way I never expected my own home to feel. I found myself moving slowly through the rooms, touching the furniture, the curtains, the familiar walls, as if grounding myself in the things that had not changed. Because he had. And that was a truth too large to escape. I tried to tell myself that it was normal for a son to build his own life. I tried to believe that his new priorities did not erase what we once had. But a mother's heart is sensitive, and mine heard the distance before it saw it. Some nights I sat on my bed and whispered to myself that I had not lost him, not really. That maybe this was just a phase. That maybe Sana had misunderstood me. But deep inside, I knew the space between us had grown from misunderstanding into something heavier, something that could not be undone by a single conversation. And that thought broke me in a quiet, steady way. One evening, I gathered the courage to call Saad, hoping his voice would soften the pain inside me. When he answered, his tone was polite, even kind, but distant in a way that felt unfamiliar. He asked how I was doing, and I told him I was fine, even though the words tasted untrue. He asked if I needed anything, and I said no quickly, afraid that any request might push him further away. We talked for only a few minutes, but every second carried a weight I could hardly bear. I kept waiting for him to ask if he could visit, or if I needed company, or even if he had misunderstood something from the other day. But he didn't. He ended the call gently, promising he would check in later, though something in his voice sounded like a promise made only out of responsibility. I sat with the phone in my lap long after the call ended, staring at the dark screen as if it might offer comfort. But it didn't. It only reflected the truth I had been avoiding. My son loved me, but from a distance he believed was necessary. And Sanaa's words had created a line between us that he was too afraid to cross. I realized then that sometimes love doesn't disappear. It just becomes quiet, hidden behind walls built out of someone else's fears. And that quietness can feel more painful than anger. A few days later I decided to visit them. Not to confront, not to explain, but simply to remind my heart that I still had a son, that he was real, that our bond had not dissolved completely. When I reached their home, Sanaa opened the door. Her smile was polite, almost practiced, as if kindness was something she offered only when necessary. She welcomed me inside, but her tone carried a subtle hesitation, something I could feel even if she didn't say it aloud. I walked through the living room, noticing the small changes they had made. The new cushions, the framed photo on the wall, the soft scent of lavender. Everything felt neat, organized, controlled. Saad came out a moment later, surprised but trying not to show it. He hugged me briefly, his arms warm but his heart distant. We talked for a while, sitting together, but every pause felt heavier than the words spoken. Sanaa joined us, and though she spoke gently, her presence felt like a barrier I could not cross. I kept wondering what she had told him, what fear she had planted in his mind that made him distance himself from me. But I did not ask. I simply sat there, smiling when needed, nodding when expected, and holding my emotions tightly like fragile glass. As I left their home that evening, I realized I had stepped into a new chapter of motherhood, one where love remained, but access to it was no longer mine to decide. That night, when I reached home again, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not resentment, just a quiet understanding. Saad was not choosing Sanaa over me out of cruelty or betrayal. He was choosing peace within his own home, the life he was building, the stability he thought he needed. And Sanaa, whether intentionally or out of insecurity, was guarding her space in a way she believed was right. I could not change their choices. I could not demand closeness from a heart that believed distance was safer. I could only adapt. I could only soften. Motherhood had always taught me to give more love than I received, and now that lesson felt sharper than ever. So I made a decision, not to step away, but to step back gently, in a way that preserved my dignity and my heart. I promised myself I would stop waiting at the door for Saad's footsteps. I would stop expecting calls filled with warmth. I would stop replaying Sanaa's words in my mind. Instead, I would focus on my own peace, my own quiet joys, my own days. Not because I loved him any less, but because I finally realized love sometimes means not holding on too tightly. It means letting someone breathe, even if the space they take is painful. I sat in the quiet of my room for a long time, listening only to the sound of my own breathing. It was strange how silence could feel so heavy, how it could press against the chest like an invisible weight. I thought about Saad's face, frozen somewhere between guilt and helplessness, a look I had never seen on him before. In my mind, I kept replaying his words, the ones he had spoken with such softness that they felt like tiny needles on my heart. "Mom, maybe you should give us some space." It was not the sentence itself that hurt me. It was the realization beneath it, that he no longer trusted my place in his life without someone else's permission. I sat with that thought the way one sits with grief, slowly turning it in my hands, feeling its sharp edges. I wondered if this was what all mothers eventually learned, that love does not stay the same, that it reshapes itself as children grow, that it sometimes pulls away even when we reach out gently. And yet, deep inside, another truth also rose. That love, real love, does not break even when a heart cracks. Wait. Breathe. It bends without shattering. I wiped my eyes, took a slow breath and whispered to myself, I will not let this end in bitterness. The next morning, when sunlight entered the house with its soft warmth, everything looked different to me. Not because anything had changed on the outside, but because I had changed a little on the inside. I moved around the kitchen quietly, touching the plates, the cups, the old wooden shelves, as if reminding myself that I still had a home within myself. When Saad entered the kitchen, he looked surprised to see me calm. His eyes lingered on my face, searching for signs of hurt that I had hidden beneath slow breaths and quiet strength. He opened his mouth to speak, but I gently raised my hand. Let me talk today, I said softly. He nodded like a child waiting to be forgiven, and something in that sight softened my heart instead of hardening it. I told him I understood that marriages brought new priorities, new boundaries, new sensitivities. I told him I knew Sanaa was trying to protect what she believed was her place. I told him I knew he was stuck between love and loyalty, and that any choice he made would have caused pain somewhere. Then I told him the hardest truth, that I was letting go of expectations, not love. His eyes filled with tears he didn't know how to express, and I felt my chest loosen for the first time in days. Later that afternoon I went to Sanaa. She stood by the window, unsure, her fingers twisting the edge of her scarf. I walked toward her slowly, not with anger, but with the heaviness of a woman who had lived long enough to understand that fear sometimes hides behind pride. When she looked at me, her eyes flickered with guilt, but also with confusion, as if she was not sure whether I had come to confront or to comfort. I spoke first, with a voice steady but soft. Sanaa, I am not your enemy, I told her, each word chosen with care. I am Saad's mother, yes. But I am also a woman who knows what it feels like to want space, to want love, to want a place of her own. She looked down, ashamed, but I gently touched her hand. I told her that I understood her fear of losing Saad's attention, that I understood how new marriages carried their own quiet insecurities. I told her she did not need to push me away to keep my son close. For the first time, her eyes filled with something real. Not defensiveness, not irritation, but a kind of fragile understanding. She whispered a small apology, one she had probably practiced many times but never found the courage to say. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. Forgiveness sometimes opens doors that confrontation keeps closed. That evening, I watched Saad and Sanaa move around the house with a quiet gentleness, as if trying to place each step carefully. They spoke to each other in softer tones, checking on me with grateful glances that said more than words could. I felt something settle inside me, not complete healing, not total peace, but the beginning of both. Healing does not come all at once. Comes in slow breaths and small realizations. It comes in moments when the heart decides to loosen its grip on pain. As I sat with them, drinking tea at the dinner table, I knew the relationship would not simply return to what it once was. It would change, and that was all right. Change did not mean loss. Change meant growth, new shapes, new meanings. I looked at Saad, and for the first time since everything happened, he looked back with the softness of a son who remembered who he was, and who I was. Sanaa offered me another cup of tea, her eyes not avoiding mine this time, and I smiled gently. Silence filled the room again, but this time it was warm. And inside that warmth, I realized something important. Love survives not because it is perfect, but because it learns how to bend. I remember waking up the next morning with a strange quietness in my heart. It was not the heavy silence that comes from pain. It was the kind that arrives when a storm has passed, when the wind is still, and you finally notice how tired you are. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, letting my hands rest in my lap, letting my breathing settle. Something inside me had accepted the truth the night before. Not with anger, not with blame, just acceptance. The truth was simple. My son had grown, and somewhere along the path, he had walked ahead without noticing I was still behind. I did not blame him, that I did not blame Sanaa. And I did not blame myself anymore. We were all human, that we all carried fears, we all made mistakes while trying to protect our hearts. I spent that morning making tea the way I liked it. Not too sweet, not too strong, just gentle. I sat by the window, letting the early sunlight fall on my hands. I looked at the steam rising from the cup, and it reminded me of all the years I had spent raising sod. Quiet heart is the only key you need. The days after that conversation moved gently, like slow waves brushing the shore. There was no sudden change, no dramatic moment where everything became perfect. Instead, it felt like a long, tender exhale after holding my breath for years. I found myself waking up in the mornings with a little less weight on my chest, a kind of quiet peace I had not felt in a very long time. Sometimes when Sod called, I would hear a hesitance in his voice, as if he was still learning how to come back to me. And I understood. Healing is not a switch. It is a slow walk. So I always answered with the same warm tone, giving him space, giving him time. I would say, "I'm here, son, talk when you are ready." And I meant it every single time. Sana changed too. Not all at once, but in small gestures. She began sending pictures of the baby, small updates about their home, a reminder that I was not invisible anymore. One morning she came to me with a cup of tea and said softly, "I didn't understand before, but I am trying now." And I simply nodded, because forgiveness does not always need long speeches. Sometimes a nod is enough. As days passed, I started finding myself again. I cooked in my own kitchen without fear of judgment. I sat in the sunlight near the window, letting warmth touch my skin. I even began writing small notes in a diary, little memories I wanted to keep, not because they were painful, but because they were part of my journey. There were still quiet evenings when I remembered the hurt, when I asked myself if I had failed as a mother or been too soft or too hopeful. But then I reminded myself that love always carries risk. A mother's heart is made to break and heal again and again. And every time it grows a little wiser. One afternoon something happened that stayed with me. I was sitting on the veranda when Sod walked out and sat beside me. For a moment he didn't speak. He just looked at the sky the way he used to when he was a boy. Then he said in a quiet voice, "Mom, I should have listened to you that day. I didn't hear your voice, and that will always hurt me." I touched his hand gently. "It's enough that you hear me now," I whispered. And in that small moment, something inside me finally settled. Not because everything was perfect, but because I realized perfection was never the goal. The goal was connection. And we had found it again, even if it looked different, even if it took longer than I had hoped. Now, when I look back at everything, at the silence, the misunderstandings, the moments when I felt completely alone, I do not feel bitterness. Instead, I feel gratitude for the strength I did not know I had. For the patience that taught me how to love without losing myself. For the slow healing that brought my family back, not in the way I imagined, but in the way life intended. And as I close this chapter of my life, I hold one gentle truth close to my heart. Sometimes people drift away not because they stop loving us, but because life teaches them lessons we cannot see. And sometimes when the time is right, they find their way back, not to who we were but to who we have become. I breathe easier now that I speak softer, that I feel lighter. And I know I was never truly unheard, my voice simply reached him when he was finally ready to listen. That night, as I lay in my quiet room, I finally accepted that love sometimes means stepping back, even when the heart wants to hold on. I realized my son had not stopped loving me. He had simply begun loving someone else too, in a different way, in a new chapter of his life. The pain I carried slowly softened into a quiet understanding, like evening light fading gently across the sky. I thought of Sana not as someone who replaced me, but as someone who feared losing her own place, just the way I once feared losing mine. And for the first time I felt compassion for her instead of sadness. I whispered a prayer for their home, hoping it would stay warm and kind, even if I was no longer standing at its center. A small part of me wished Sod would come back to my door someday, just to sit beside me and listen the way he used to. But I also knew that even if he didn't, I would still be all right, because love does not end simply because someone walks a little farther away. It lives quietly inside us, teaching us, shaping us, reminding us that every relationship has seasons. And so, with a slow breath and a softer heart, I closed my eyes and forgave everyone, including myself, hoping tomorrow would be gentler than yesterday.